Yo, what is going on, guys? And welcome back to the Backroom podcast. We are in episode 2 or 3, depending on which order I put this one in the last episode that I recorded. You guys will obviously know, but I still haven't figured it out. But this week, we are talking about Batman versus Superman. We got the Snyder Cut just not even a week ahead of us, just a few days at this point. It feels so surreal, but I figured we should go back and talk about the pinnacle of Batman and Superman, which was 2016's movie, Batman v Superman, Dawn of Justice. Not only is it starring Ben Affleck and Henry Cavill as the titular roles, it is also directed by all hell Daddy Snyder, Zack Snyder. Yeah, this is going to be a very interesting conversation this week, guys. If you guys don't know, Backroom Podcast, I talk with a new guest or guests every single week, and we just discuss movies. And this week, I've got two awesome people. I got two great friends, Jake and Mitch, over from the Film Podcast. Guys, please introduce yourself.
Man, Ryan, that was a great intro. Thanks so much for having us. My name is Mitch, and I'm one of the co-hosts of the Watching Comics podcast. We're super stoked to be here, especially me. Superman lifer here and a BVS apologist, so I'm ready to dive in. We're gonna do this. Jake, are you ready?
I'm as ready as I could possibly be. When you said less than a week out from the Snyder Cut, I about peed my pants. I'm like, oh my gosh, like the weirdest thing to ever happen, good or bad, it's about to happen. Like however anyone feels about
it's gonna be a thing, and the internet is gonna be ablaze. Those two things I know.
No, dude. Easily.
Yeah, like I seriously, I may have to just like log off the internet for a couple of days just to let all the smoke kind of clear before I come back. Whether I love it or hate it, I seriously, like, I'm not ready for the takes.
It's going to get a little out of control.
A crazy week ahead.
Mm-hmm.
Dude, yeah, you guys have been saying it perfectly. This is just a crazy week ahead. And I think this is easily one of the craziest movies to talk about when looking at Zack Snyder's 4-hour masterpiece to some people. But let's take it back. Which one do you guys prefer to watch? Do you like to watch the theatrical, or do you like to watch the quote unquote extended director's cut of this?
Oh man,
Mitch, you take it first because you've seen
okay
both.
So yeah, that's a really great question. I've actually I paid to see this movie more than once in cinemas when it came out, which, like, for some people that may not be a big deal. For me, that's a big deal because, like, I'm a parent and I have kids. And so, like, getting out of the house to go see a movie by myself before COVID stuff, just like that's a rare occurrence, right? So I really dug this movie for what it was, but I think I'm going to ride for the Ultimate Edition, Ryan. I think that's where I set because, Snyder's clearly a fan of lengthy movies. That's fine. I get that when I'm going in. But I do think that the Ultimate Edition does provide a little bit of extra context that I think is helpful for the sake of connecting all the dots, especially, I'm assuming, for what we're about to see with the Justice League 2. Like, I think there's going to be some extra threads from the BVS Ultimate Edition that come back to light in Justice League. And if you've got those two things playing there, then it's going to make a little bit more sense. I don't know if that's fair to say or not.
No, honestly, that's completely fair to say. If anyone doesn't know this out there, the only real difference between the theatrical cut of this and the Ultimate Edition is roughly around 30 extra minutes of footage. If you think about it, it seems like a lot. It adds just the finer details. It was kind of the fat trimmed, I guess you can say, on the theatrical cut, but it adds a little bit more context in the beginning of the film, like with the photographer that dies in the very beginning by Lex Luthor's Russian hitman. You find out in the Ultimate Edition, which is, I'm just going to start off with my problems. One of my problems with the film, I just see this as I don't want to be the person that says cheap, but if you look at Jimmy Olsen and the type of character he was in any comic or literally any live action story, I thought it was such an odd choice to pretty much kill the character off as soon as you introduced him. Like, not even 3 minutes of screen time, this dude already has a bullet in his head. And
Only Zack Snyder could make Jimmy Olsen a double agent, criminal informant, CIA type character. But
Yeah.
then, so like only Zack Snyder can make Jimmy Olsen more, but also keep him as a throwaway character. Because as you said, in 3 minutes he's literally dead. So like he's on screen, he's speaking foreign languages, he's clearly an informative op as well as a guy with a handy camera, and you're like, oh, that's an interesting take on Jimmy. And then 3 minutes later, he's got a bullet in his head. I like Zack Snyder, everybody. Only he would do that.
Yeah, that's
It's a
literally
real
the only way to
flex,
say it.
man.
No, yeah, I mean,
I'm impressed. I think go for it, Zach. You know, I mean, here's the thing. I'm 100% with you. Like, and I think that the recent I just got it in trade over Christmas. The Superman's pal Jimmy Olsen comic that came out last year is one of my very favorite things I've read in a really long time. And so I'm in a real Jimmy Olsen spot right now as a person where I want more of him. And so now I even more so view this as a giant missed opportunity. And yet, this movie is so packed that I'm almost relieved that they just took someone off the board at the beginning. Like, guys, we can't do another 45 minutes to flesh out Jimmy's backstory. Like, we gotta cut something here. And so they're like, all right, shoot Jimmy Olsen in the head. That's fine.
no, yeah, and that brings up a really good point. If I feel like that's what Snyder ultimately wanted to do, why even just give him the name Jimmy Olsen and just waste that time at the end of the day? I can definitely see why that scene was cut out for the theatrical edition, because I just think it added a little bit more nonsense to an already pretty nonsensical film when you look at the aspect from fan reactions. I'm not going to talk about the fan reactions now because I think they're all a little bit clouded all of a sudden for a certain reason. But we go back to 2016 up until, I would even say, hell, a year ago at this point. BVS really wasn't like too much. I remember sitting around last summer and my friend was trying to convince me to watch BVS Ultimate Edition again because we were in a heavy argument about which one was better. And I'm like, honestly, if you look at the finer details, they really don't make that much of a bigger impact on the story, especially just like the Jimmy Olsen stuff. And it doesn't hurt, but it just feels like a super odd choice at the end of the day to me, really. And it just adds more I wouldn't say context, but just more meaty scenes between all the Russian dudes just walking back and forth, and not really stuff we necessarily need to see because we already know they're bad guys. You guys know what I mean?
There is definitely a little bit of that. And I mean, I think, I don't know, this is ultimately where I come down on this movie, because I ride for this movie, but I also recognize that this movie is not, as we say, like a prestige achievement. I think one of the biggest issues we potentially run into, maybe I'm diverting a little bit too much. So if I'm going too far here, Ryan, you just tell me to shut up.
No,
But
yeah,
like,
go ahead.
I feel like one of the biggest issues we have with the hot buttonness of Zack Snyder is that I think sometimes we approach his when I say we, I think moviegoers and people on Twitter specifically, I think we approach Zack Snyder's movies like we're approaching something from Christopher Nolan or Steven Spielberg, but really what we need to be doing is approaching them as though we're watching something that's operatic and heavily invested into archetype. Like Zack Snyder's even said it before that he is much more interested in capturing opera type tones on screen than he is something with a real gritty, nuanced story. And so if you paint all of his work with that lens, then everything starts to make a little bit more sense. We're not necessarily leaning into character nuance. We're not necessarily leaning into, deep, thick plot continuity. We're doing big swings, big sweeping emotional statements, pure archetype, and heavy visualization. Not necessarily auteur-ish, but just heavy visualization and building up to specifically earned moments that may even feel like blatant emotional manipulation. But those moments do land because in an operatic sense, you're going for larger than life, you're going for grandiose, and that's what opera does. And so if that's how we approach his movies, then I feel like that changes the playing field quite a bit. We're not necessarily comparing apples and oranges anymore. We're in a completely different arena from that point. Now, that doesn't make BVS a perfect movie. It's far from it. And I'm sure we'll unpack some things that all three of us didn't necessarily have that we have problems with. But at the same time, I do think that this movie carries a higher entertainment value if you view it through that lens rather than a lens of like, is this prestige filmmaking? That I don't know, Jake, Ryan, does that make any sense at all?
I'll jump in and say, Ryan, that Mitch and I have, I don't know if we've invested more time hand wringing about any topic other than like as much as we have Zack Snyder. On our podcast, we have gone to such lengths to both demonize and redeem this man, sometimes in the same 5 minutes, where we are just like, we're trying to like, I think that, Mitch, I think I speak for both of us when I say that we find Zack Snyder to be a talented man and a complete enigma of a human being who, all that to say, Mitch, everything he just said is stuff that I have heard him say before that slowly over the course of the last 3 years has kind of brought me around to a new way of viewing the Snyderverse, for lack of a better term. I think that, I'll jump in and I'll spoil it. This is not my favorite superhero film. It's not crazy high on my list, and that's me trying to be nice about saying what I'm trying to say about it.
Without making everybody come at you on Twitter, is what you're saying.
Yeah, well, I'm mostly just trying to be respectful to, again, Zack Snyder, who I think there's a really clear vision in his head of his interpretation of the Justice League and his interpretation of the DC universe, that when you read it all, when you put it down on paper, start to finish, you see what the man's trying to accomplish. It makes a whole lot of sense. But there's something about the pacing, not in terms of the movie itself scene to scene, but the pacing in terms of this is going to happen in this film and that's going to happen in this film. The big picture, the whole arc of the thing, something about the pacing is off to me, where this movie is trying to continue a sentence that Man of Steel began, but I think Man of Steel should have finished the sentence, right? And that's sort of looking at the character development of Superman, but then you add in the character development of Batman, who by this point is jaded. And look, I can handle these two characters killing people, okay? It's not my preferred interpretation, but I can handle it.
Batman's leaning hard into the get off my lawn attitude in this particular movie.
Very much.
Well, and like I can also handle, I enjoy the subtlety of just showing me the messed up Robin suit and then letting Batman go Rambo on like 40 dudes at once, right? Like I can handle all of that, but there's something about cramming it in when we didn't fully resolve the whole thing with Superman snapping Zod's neck. That to me, it just, before we finish one thought, we're also starting another one. And that's where it starts to get messy for me. And so if you're talking to me about Snyder's vision of a DC universe where Superman and Batman are these flawed characters who, through a friendship together and the influence of their new friends, specifically Wonder Woman, who is the shining beacon of goodness, begin to resolve into the characters we know and love, I'm on board for that. But when you drag it out over like 8 years and 6 movies and $50 in movie tickets, I start to get a little fatigued, and it gets harder for me to see the forest for the trees. I almost
wonder, Ryan, would you say it's fair to claim maybe that could BVS have been better if it wasn't also preoccupied with trying to connect to a Justice League? Like maybe our minds will be changed after we see the Snyder Cut in less than a week. I'm completely open to that. I'm interested to see what this looks like. But outside of the Lex Luthor piece, which we can get to later, I think my biggest complaint about BVS is.
Before we get to Lex Luthor, you said we can use swear words,
Yeah,
right?
Go ahead.
Cool. Okay, go ahead.
Other than the Lex Luthor piece, which and the title of the movie, which are maybe my two biggest takes, but like I would say my biggest complaint about this movie, outside of those two things, is the road tracks that they're trying to build for the Justice League that's eventually coming feels like it's getting in the way of what makes Batman versus Superman work. Like anytime we have a moment like that, I'm like, this doesn't belong here, or it's disrupting some really good momentum, or it's being done a little bit too cavalierly here in this slide, even for an operatic type movie. I don't know. Ryan, what do you think?
I think you guys actually almost pinned it perfectly. This movie is trying to be so many different things. It's trying to be a Man of Steel sequel, while a prelude to Justice League, while trying to introduce a completely different Batman, on top of trying to do the Doomsday storyline, all in a singular. Hell, even a 3 hour film isn't even long enough for this story
That's
to
more. That's like a
actually be
quadruple stuffed
told.
Oreo. That's just like
Exactly. It's four different storylines that they have to worry about on top of clearing things up from the previous Man of Steel film, because this was only the second film in the DCEU. They took a 3 year gap for whatever reason, and they didn't decide to do anything useful with that time. Like, they could have done a fucking second Man of Steel 2 film for all we could have known at that point, or make that Ben Affleck solo film much sooner. And I feel like not only that, but man, do I really dislike a lot of the characters in this film. None of them I really fucking care about. And I'll get to that like right now. I can't stand Lois Lane in this movie. I think she's absolutely one of the worst Lois Lanes that we've had. And I cannot wait until Amy Adams stops playing Lois Lane.
okay. So is that let me ask? Is that an Amy Adams problem or is that a screenwriting problem?
It's both.
Okay.
I'm not the biggest fan of Amy Adams, but I do appreciate her performances in like certain projects and how she does it. But the writing just doesn't help her at all. So just two bad things for me coming together. And this is ultimately a film that is just too jointed together with so many different things. And I think the best way to explain what this movie is was the biggest problem before this film came out, and I think that was the trailer. Do you guys remember how infamously notorious the Batman v Superman trailers were for giving away the entire single plot thread for this film? Like, they literally spoiled the death of Superman in one of the trailers, I'm pretty sure.
Yeah.
And if not, they were close
Oh
to it.
yeah.
Yeah.
Well, and they showed Doomsday, didn't they?
Yeah, they showed Doomsday. They showed every single big thing. I'm pretty sure they even hinted at the Justice League film in this movie.
All
Like,
the beats
what?
were there. Yeah, I don't think there was really left much left to the imagination as far as what were the tent poles of the story going to be after you watched a 90-second trailer.
Yeah, I feel like the 90-second to 2 minute trailer just gave us the highlights of the film that we were watching, and they're like, hey, let's just give you these milestone points, and then you could just kind of fill in the in-betweens. And that's exactly what we did. We were given these big moments in the film, and it was kind of like, here, free rate, tell us what you want to happen. And then what everyone wrote is exactly what happened. And this movie was just way too predictable. I mean, I don't really think I have to say too much on that. They pretty much did the exact same thing for the Doomsday storyline. And I hate to be that person. I'm trying to see this like before Wonder Woman 1984 come out. If you guys know the argument I'm about to make, but I'm about to make it. I don't know why Wonder Woman didn't just fly instead of Superman. Like, she flew in 1984, bro. And I know Zack Snyder consulted on that film. So there's no way that he said, "You know what? That's a problem." Cuz if he thought that she could fly, then she just wanted Superman to die, honestly. I think she just wanted to be the most powerful person out of the Justice League. That's really what it looks
Well,
like.
I mean, we could talk about character motivations all we want, but I also think that the big elephant in the room is just the fact that um, continuity on details like that is not necessarily going to be on the forefront of a Zack Snyder project, and that's not an indictment one way or the other on the Snyder process. I just think that's a consistency if you look at his body of work.
No, yeah, that's sort of why I was kind of hesitant to break it up. But it's weird how the films after that, with all the continuity issues, just make Batman versus Superman kind of crumble a little bit more for me, because we were expected to get this one thing from a character. Like Batman, for example, we were supposed to get a slew of Batman Batfleck stuff. And now they're pretty much going to kill him in Flashpoint, I'm pretty sure. And that's just what DC is notorious for. They say a whole slew of things, and then once one thing goes wrong, they backtrack it, and then it just messes up their entire problem. And I think BVS is the entire epitome of that problem. Once BVS got one negative review, man, did they start overhauling that Justice League film and the whole third act of Wonder Woman. I mean, because of the critical failure of this movie, they completely rewrote and redid the entire third act. I remember seeing Patty wanting to do a completely third act, but because of this film, they changed all that to have a better action scene at the end or something.
and
It's
and
insane.
and I almost wonder if this comes back to the competition piece, right? The MCU versus DCEU of it all. Like, I don't know. I mean, I feel like that conversation is to be completely frank, like boring. I'm not interested in litigating between those two completely different like universes, but it does seem like that DCEU was trying to crack the code of MCU found the way rather than just letting themselves focus on telling good stories. Like as I've said it before, I have fun with BVS. Do I put it in my top 10 comic book movies of all time? Not even close. Do I call it a fantastic movie? No, but I have fun with it and I've got an emotional connection to it, and that's good enough for me to rewatch it every once in a while. And I also recognize that I'm bringing my huge Superman fandom into that piece. But I don't know. Like, if they would have just focused on telling a good story, like if what they're telling is, the Dark Knight Returns and the death of Superman, kind of in a melded together cohesive story there. Like, if they would have focused on that rather than worrying about, are we following a formula and are we connecting to the Justice League movie that we think we're going to be doing, but we're not 100% for sure yet. Like, if all of those pieces were removed and they were just saying, let's put Superman and Batman on screen together in the best way that we possibly could, we probably would be changing our tune a little bit than we would be right now. But like, here we are saying like, oh man, it's got good moments, it's got frustrating moments, could have been better type of thing. But yeah, I don't know. I think maybe they just got into that pissing contest a little bit too much.
I think that you're absolutely, surprised. The two guys that do this every week agree. I think that yeah, I think that you're kind of right on the money there, because we saw so many, like, remove comic books from the equation for just a second, which I know is difficult with
I was
Batman
like,
and Superman.
really? We're doing this now?
Right, I know. No, but just take a broad look at popcorn movies, genre films in this stretch of time. And I'm not even sure we're out of it or if we're just on hiatus for COVID, but you see this trend of every studio is trying to get their hands on a franchise, and they're trying to repeat. It's a copycat system, and they're trying to repeat the Marvel magic. And so you've got somebody's talking G.I. Joe, right? And another group is like, how do we expand the Transformers franchise? And they're like, let's just get the rights to Dracula and see if we can, that's public domain, right? We could make a franchise off of that. And everybody was grabbing at something, and every A-list star they could get in a room, they're like, oh, he's going to play this person and she'll play that. And I feel like when you look at it big picture and you remove, and this is not, Mitch, this is a totally in line with what you're saying.
It's the gold rush in cinema is what it is.
Yeah, and if you zoom out even more, right, away from just the Marvel versus DC of it, you absolutely have Warner Brothers getting caught up in that gold rush like everybody else. And this movie is suffering not from a comic book problem, it's suffering from a 2010s movie problem that every single studio had, trying to just print money the way that Disney does. And it can't be replicated because there's this guy named Kevin that you can't get in the room unless you work at Disney. And that's really what it comes down to, is this thing got so busy and bloated in so many ways, like we've already started talking about. And again, we haven't even gotten to Lex Luthor yet. And there's so many bloated elements here that in a lot of ways, I kind of want to go to bat for Snyder and say, you're Ryan. You started talking about, yeah, they made changes to the Justice League movie and to Wonder Woman. I don't know that Snyder ever really got to get his vision out the gate. And frankly, for everybody who thinks that the Snyder cut is going to be some resolution of that, it's not, because best case scenario, we just get one more piece to a puzzle that isn't going to be
And
finished.
with that, Jake has officially made everyone on Twitter angry. Thank you, Jake. I'm glad it's you, not me.
Come get me. That's what I'm here for.
No.
I don't like Logan
Well,
either.
yeah, we've
There,
already
I
done
said
that. So if you go ahead, Ryan. It's all good.
I was just gonna agree with you guys. I think that was their ultimate demise and their biggest wrongdoing was they were trying to fast track a universe that couldn't be fast tracked. I think DC is the perfect example of what not to do when you're trying to copy Marvel. I think actually, if we're gonna look at, I guess you can say, a cinematic universe that has done it decently well without overextending itself. That's the monster universe that they've been doing with Godzilla and Kong recently.
Oh, I thought for
I
sure you were going to say the Christopher Guest mockumentaries, but
no,
yes.
no, no. I just think that the monster universe, or the monsterverse as they call it, has just been doing really good, and they know exactly what they are, and they're taking their time to build up to this Kong or Godzilla versus Kong movie coming out in a few weeks. And I don't see them doing anything after that, which is perfectly fine because I feel like they've done everything they've needed. And I think they get that. But DC just has not gotten the message yet. I just don't know what it is with them. Even back in 2016, people told them not to rush a universe. Like at this point when this film came out, Marvel was already doing this for 8 years. 2016, 2008, yeah, 6 years. 8 years. And bro, you can't make up 8 years in a matter of 3 years since you've made your last movie in this quote unquote universe. And so they go from Iron Man straight to the Avengers, pretty much. Or no, Iron Man to Civil War to Endgame, which looks like the Snyder cut's gonna turn out to be, with this cliffhanger ending all of a sudden.
Yeah, it's going to be a lot. I mean, a 4-hour movie. I mean, that's really what we're staring at here with the Snyder cut. What's interesting about BVS is that I don't know, like there are glaring flaws in this movie. That's ultimately what we're all deciding on. Although I'm not 100% here for the Amy Adams slander, but it's not my podcast, so I'm not going to go that deep. But the biggest thing here, though, with BVS is that I think some of the missteps along the way were just with trying to identify what core components of the characters they really wanted to put at the forefront. And I think Jake kind of hinted at this, and Ryan, you mentioned this is clearly a pain point for you. But like, I mean, even from a practical standpoint, anybody else recognize the fact that Lex Luthor interacts with Bruce Wayne more than he does with Clark Kent or Superman in this movie? Like, there are just some backwards thinking or some small details that were missed along the way that end up being big issues when you're looking at this big thing. They still can't. We're still, after BVS, as much as I enjoy Man of Steel and Batman versus Superman as kind of a fanboy standpoint, I don't think that they're the greatest installments of comic cinema, but for a fanboy, they are what they are. But even still, after this, let's see, Man of Steel was 2.5 hours. The Ultimate Edition of BVS is 3 hours, right? After 5.5 hours of 2 Superman movies, we still don't know what the core character trait of Superman's going to be. Is he going to be gritty and dark and broody, or is he going to be the Boy Scout that saves everybody? And they can't decide that. And even after 2 movies and 5.5 hours of runtime, I ought to be able to know what is your true north with this character. And with someone like Batman and BVS, like, I love the Frank Miller treatment that they gave him. I think Affleck did a good job of tackling the character as best he could with the real estate that he was given. But even still, there are still some pieces in there, as we've discussed, that were more disconnected than they needed to be, or more convoluted than they needed to be. And if you're looking for a microcosm of at least the early half of the DCEU and what its struggles were, I think this is it, where we're looking at a Herculean movie that was supposed to be a big, big thing. We've already invested 5.5 hours into this stuff, and we still don't know the core competencies of the two most notorious characters of the entire universe. That tells me there's maybe a direction and or visionary problem, and that stretches beyond just, are we putting words on paper for a story?
No, yeah, Mitch, you pretty much hit it nail on the head. And that brings up a really good point that I just thought about when I was watching this movie a few days ago to get prepared for this. I found myself way more invested in the Batman stuff than the Superman stuff.
Mm-hmm.
And when you find yourself more invested in one side than the other, when they're both supposed to be very important that interconnect at the end, that's when you find a really big problem. And I noticed in the extended cut, they actually gave a lot more scenes to Henry Cavill in being more of a reporter as Clark Kent. There's very much more Clark being a reporter in the extended cut.
Mm-hmm.
And
Mm-hmm.
I don't think it really added anything for Clark's character. If they wanted to add more of Clark slash Superman, I think they should have just stuck with Superman because that's essentially what the whole film has been wrapped around with. I don't think we should have seen too much Clark Kent unless he was home talking to Martha or Lois Lane. But
Mm-hmm.
other than that, he should have just been Superman trying to figure out how to not or how to fix the problem that he's in from being framed by Lex Luthor. And
There's
that's
a lot much more,
also
there's a lot more rich real estate. I'm agreeing with you. I think there's a lot more rich real
yeah.
estate found in like the immigrant alien storyline than there is in the Kansas reporter storyline. And if they were really going to lean into some extra minutes for one of those parts of the character, I feel like there was still, I don't know, there's still a lot more inspirational stuff that could be said for the concept of like Superman is an immigrant, and he's a representative, a beacon of hope. Like they could have explored that a little bit deeper, I think.
Yeah, and when I was watching it this time, something that really hit me harder that kind of annoyed me was I couldn't figure out why anyone really thought this was Superman or why anything that they're blaming Superman for was actually Superman. Everything they've done and shown doesn't really prove Superman was there. Oh, they found a bullet case leading back to Superman. Like, bro, one, have you ever seen Superman use a gun? And two, what would he be using a bullet for in the beginning opening scene? On top of the entire blowing up the Capitol scene, which I thought was kind of ridiculous that they thought Superman was blowing it up, especially after seeing the events of the first film. Like, homie, Zod came to your planet, literally threatened you, had these big dildo machines planting their penis into the earth, absorbing its energy to turn into Krypton. This is the only man that stopped that, and you guys are like questioning him based off of a bullet tracing and a capital explosion that you can't even confirm that was him. That's kind of what just like really tickled me. If you guys can help me switch my opinion, please do it. Because that's what I hope when I talk to people
I
about
think
this
that
movie.
you're starting to touch on something that, for me was really just off about the whole thing. And I actually I'll go ahead and just throw it out there again. Like Mitch said, not our podcast. I enjoy Amy's Lois. What does not work for me is Jesse Eisenberg as Lex Luthor. I think that I've said for a long time that I think that the studio took the wrong message from the Nolan Batman movies. And I think that message they took was, the more a movie looks like The Dark Knight, the more money it's going to make.
Both practically
And
and with characters, because you got to turn
right?
the camera tone to sepia, man. It's got to be sepia or nothing.
if we can't grayscale it, it doesn't work. Yeah, no, and so I think that I just feel like Jesse Eisenberg is doing this bizarre, like, Joker bit, and it's not exactly that, but it's so, I don't know, it's so colored by that, and it lacks any of what, for me, makes Lex Luthor a compelling character. And we talk a lot on our podcast about like trying to be open to the fact that, you know, all of these things are reinterpretations of characters that have long transcended any one interpretation. And I try to approach all these things with an open mind and with understanding that, you know, every person's going to bring their particular flavor to it, and it's all good, and the things that I like are still out there even if I don't like some things. But for me, there's so much, there's a point where you can go so far, right, that it starts, I don't know, it kind of loses touch with what made it an interpretation of something in the first place. And I just feel like Jesse Eisenberg's Lex Luthor is, I mean, he's making people drink pee, and he's like,
It's his energy is definitely wrong for the movie, and I think that's a huge thing. But here's
And
my
it's
question: like, wrong for the movie, absolutely, and it sucks because then his piece is so core to so many of the tipping points in this movie, right? Like Lex Luthor is supposed to be the fulcrum
Yes.
for so many other things, so that's what the issue is. If he was a periphery character, it wouldn't be as big of a deal. But the thing I was tweeting about last night as I was rewatching this was, I'm not necessarily anti Eisenberg's interpretation of the character. I'm anti this interpretation of the character in this movie, where the energy clearly feels like oil and water. Like, I'm wondering, if Sam Raimi directed this movie, would we be viewing Eisenberg's Lex Luthor as something that's endearing rather than bad? Because I don't necessarily think I'm anti his performance. It just doesn't belong in this particular tone. But man, I got a lot of Willem Dafoe Green Goblin vibes out of him.
I'm going to have nightmares tonight based on the comment Sam Raimi's Batman versus Superman. Like, I'm going to see some crap in my dreams, man.
That's what I'm here for.
Honestly, Sam Raimi's gonna kill it in Doctor Strange too, man. I
can't even wait.
I love Sam Raimi. I'm 100%.
We ride for
Raimi.
Raimi.
He's a legend.
Mm-hmm.
Bro, you guys want to know the biggest pet peeve I have with Batman versus Superman that I didn't even notice I had until this last rewatch? It might bother you guys, but have you noticed every single time they either introduce someone part of the Justice League or anyone shares the screen with Diana Prince, they just start randomly playing her theme song. They play it at least 7 to 8 times in this film, and I don't know why.
So
it's a heavy-handed operatic move. Like, again, if you're viewing it through the lens of Zack Snyder's making an opera, that is such a common thing. But if we're looking at it through the lens of like, okay, if this is supposed to be prestige filmmaking, why are we being this heavy-handed and assuming everyone's this dumb? I don't know if there's a balance to be had there.
No, yeah.
I seriously, and I enjoy the heck out of the first Wonder Woman, and I even found some things to like about the second one. I seriously cannot handle her theme just because of this movie's insistence on utilizing it as boss fight music from a 90s video game. And and I think when the thing for me is like, I actually had a really great experience seeing this movie. And Mitch and I talk sometimes about how like your experience in the theater colors things. I had a long lost friend that I had fallen out of touch with, called me out of nowhere and was like, dude, let's go see Batman versus Superman. And I said, absolutely, this could, and we had such a blast. This is somebody that, you know, I used to talk about comics with. We hadn't seen each other in forever. And it was super great. I had such a good experience. And I think that in some ways it redeemed the movie for me. But I remember sitting in that seat and trying to be an apologist and saying, okay, so this worked. Martha got silly. This was weird. But then when Doomsday shows up and they start playing the electric guitar
Yeah,
Wonder
dude, I
Woman
can
theme with
feel
the
my head.
and I just was like, okay, she's gonna throw a fatality at him here any moment, and it just got so. Like for a movie that and Mitch, I'm with you on the operatic stuff, but something about this like left the realm of operatic for me and entered the
Which
realm
is
of
totally
Street
fair.
Fighter,
Like
and it just got
you can hit it home so much to a point where it loses its effectiveness and then even crosses over into
Absolutely.
unintentional comedy, right?
And
So then it becomes
Yes,
a
and that
competition of
man,
which is the biggest moment of unintentional comedy, Martha or the Wonder Woman theme usage. I don't know.
definitely Martha.
Martha. Oh, I know
Definitely
it's Martha.
Martha.
Listen, Deadpool still shouts Martha in comic books when people are beating him,
As he
so
should.
it's Martha.
As he should. Dude, I feel like, you know what? We have been bashing on this movie a little bit. I do want to give this movie a really high praise, and that's the fight scene between Batman and Superman. Now, yeah, it was a super short fight scene, but man, do I give a lot of credit to Zach for being able to show people that even Batman can stand up to Superman and still potentially kill him. And I feel like that allows people to open up their mind to more humans being able to kill Superman and making more people more of a threat, because throughout the entire film, he's just seen as this untouched god. No one can kill him. You can blow him up. Nothing happens to this dude. But you find this nice glowy rock, and Batman makes the most out of it, I think.
If you have
So
enough
I give a
aggro
lot of credit.
crag from Nickelodeon's Guts, you can do anything.
Ugh.
Do you have it?
But I do think, Ryan, though, you're onto something there. The concept of like that I think that moment was like, it was thrilling for the right reasons. The choreography was sound, the camera work was grounded, and the practicality, in as much as ridiculousness this movie dwells in, the practicality of exactly what you're mentioning with Batman attempting to stand toe to toe for Superman, like it all felt plausible in that moment. And that's a big deal. Like that's a hard thing to pull off. So if nothing else, as you said, I think it's worth giving Zach credit on that.
Yeah.
I'm here for Benry, man. Ben, Affleck, and I always try not to say his last name because I don't know if it's Cavill or Cavill. But
Henry and his perfectly suaved pomade hair.
Yes.
When he goes
yeah,
full suits,
no
that pomade, man, it's on thick.
I really feel like those two guys bring such strength to this film. And I think that for all the things that don't land for me, the casting in the two most important roles nails it. And I loved Batfleck. And I say that as someone that I'm ashamed to admit was part of the loud chorus of people making stupid jokes on Twitter when he was announced.
We all were.
And I made some Daredevil comparisons that have not aged well in a lot of ways.
I can tell
I'm with it. Listen,
I can tell you like what I was doing and how I reacted the day they announced Batfleck. I was literally playing Call of Duty on my Xbox.
Yeah,
and it was like a pregame lobby. I was scrolling through Twitter, and then THR reports like Ben Affleck is your new Batman. I'm like, what the fuck? That was my bro. That's exactly how I said it, because one, bro, who would have thought Ben Affleck, of all people, the guy who played Daredevil in 2003, the best comic book film ever made, being Batman? Like, what?
Because Zack Snyder clearly saw Armageddon. That's how.
Oh, bro, easily. And I gotta give you, man, Ben really gave it his all for this role, dude.
Mm-hmm.
He fucking
he nailed it.
He's fantastic Batman and Bruce Wayne. I really think he is. Like, he brought the right energy. He fit. He was a perfect fit for the Frank Miller suit. Well. The tone was great. I mean, he sunk his teeth into the role. Now, the weightlifting montage that's just randomly placed in the middle portion of the movie was a little Rocky adjacent for me. But I mean, outside of that, like, I think the guy brought it. And you know what? I had a friend interacting with me on Twitter earlier today, actually, about the Superman bit and Cavill's casting and all of that. And like, Say what you want about acting choices or lack thereof. Say what you want about real estate he was given within the storyline. Say what you want about all the Superman stuff. You can't deny the fact that when Cavill puts the fresh pomade in the hair and he straps on the leather suit, the dude looks like friggin' Superman. And I mean that in the best way possible.
Yeah, I agree with you, but as he looks more like Superman, bro, like I don't know how these people have jobs at working for a newspaper, but dude, he wears the same exact hairstyle as Superman, and bro, it's just so obvious that he's super. It just blows my mind. I know that's like an old argument now, but I feel like with Cavill more than ever, I see Cavill as like Superman, and he's the most looking Superman outside a Superman costume that you could possibly get for the
He's
role.
got those. He's got that incredibly well defined
It's the
nose and
jawline.
chin and the jawline, and then you're like the Weezer glasses aren't enough to mask that whole thing. It's just not.
Yeah. No, dude, honestly, it's really true, but I really want to get your thoughts on obviously the best scene of any comic book film, and that's the Justice League teaser scene. What do you guys think about that?
I mean,
When they're reviewing
yeah,
all the
when he's
tapes
Yeah.
and they
the
show
gripping moment when he's opening files on a computer. Yeah.
As he's listening to the Wonder Woman theme song, by the way.
Well, I mean, clearly someone read an early draft of the script and was like, okay, every 10 pages, we need the Wonder Woman needle drop or we have nothing. And so they went back and they took that note really seriously.
Dude, quite literally, because I thought the Flash scene that they had, that I'm gonna assume connects to Zack Snyder's Justice League next week, where he comes back in time to warn him. I actually thought that was a really cool scene, and I thought that was the only cameo we were gonna get when I was watching the film. And man, was I heavily disappointed when I realized it wasn't.
Yeah, I don't know. It's really interesting. The rewatchability factor changes everything in some senses. Like I remember watching it in cinemas thinking like, "Oh, that was really cool. That was a great way to infuse the Flash right there." And I'm right there with you, Ryan.
Yeah.
I'm rewatching it. I rewatched it last night and I was like, that did nothing for me. And I don't necessarily know why, other than I just thought it was a little bit goofy. And maybe it's more about the concept of shoehorning Justice League into this movie as a whole and not necessarily that particular moment. But I don't know. The second time around, I was like, this is not really buying that. I don't know. Jake, do you have any thoughts on the Justice League of it all?
Yeah, for me, it always felt, this goes back to the idea that the movie's a little crowded. Just a little trouble finding some breathing room. To me, I'm hesitant to be overly critical of it because I think that if the rest of the movie is a lot tighter, then this is a really cool, like this is Nick Fury popping in at the end of Iron Man, right? But because the rest of the movie is messy and crowded, and because it struggles to hold on to one thought for long enough, this becomes just one more voice in an echo chamber. And so it just becomes a little bit messier. And it's one more thing where, and I have also, I texted Mitch this earlier in the week, and I'm sure there's going to be plenty of opportunity for me to say these things in the next few weeks. This has nothing to do with Ray Fisher or with any writing or anything. I cannot stand the visual design on the live action Cyborg. I don't like it in execution, especially. I think that any scene with him, I just stare at him and I'm like, that looks like half a Terminator with Ray Fisher's head on top of it.
No, yeah.
And all that to say that introducing Cyborg here, that was the first time that I had that thought. I remember him popping on and just going, oh, okay.
But where do you stand on Superman with or without trunks? That's really the important thing.
Yeah, that's a serious question.
I mean, if I were designing him, I would include the trunks. I would. If he does not have them, it does not bother me one bit.
I only bring it,
But if I am the one sitting
I only
down,
bring it up because one, I think it's hysterical, but two, like I almost feel like that's the same type of thing, right? Is like it's interesting how we capture these design pieces because some
yeah,
of it
that's
matters
true.
and some of it doesn't. It's just really interesting the things that hit us, right? Because like it sounds like we're all in agreement. Like the Batfleck Batsuit was just kick ass, but the cyborg production design is like left us for wanting. And what does that mean for how we approach the character? I don't know. Keep going though.
I just think I think you bring up a great point that there are people ready to die over Batman's trunks or not.
Yeah, bro.
Like I'm pretty sure that there are people ready to have like fights in the
To the
street
death.
with chains and bottles.
Yeah, to the death.
Yeah. It's nuts the way like I definitely with what I just said put a mark on my back where if anybody ever figures out it's me walking down the street, I'm in trouble.
Yeah, Jake, I think you touched on something really well when you were talking about the implementation of where they put that whole teaser cameo scene for all the characters, and you were comparing it to the Nick Fury thing in Iron Man. I think that's the biggest difference is Marvel didn't just shoehorn it in the middle of the film. They took it and
Absolutely.
saved it for the end, because if we really
Yeah.
look at it, this scene could have easily been played at the end of the credits, and I know it's looking at the
actually
Russians.
better that way, right? That would be a perfect end of credits scene.
It would have been a perfect end credit scene. I think instead of him decrypting the laptop so soon, it could have just been decrypting for the rest of the film once he got it. And then the post-credit scene is him just decrypting and like, oh shit, bro, Justice League is next, because it really was next. That's how I would have liked to see and done it, but you know, fans are always wrong.
Well, and even if you don't think you're wrong, you're going to be told you're wrong online. That's just the way the internet works.
Obviously.
Okay,
Obviously.
can I ask a question that may not be pertinent to this conversation, but if it is, then we can by all means explore it. At one point, do we need to get serious about talking about Alfred's complicity to Batman's lack of mental fortitude? Like, Alfred is totally fine seeing Batman and Bruce Wayne clearly need therapy and clearly need some extra emotional support and effort into a medical degree. And instead, he's just like, I'm just going to give you a quippy one-liner. You're not going to listen to me, and I'm going to consider my hands washed to the whole thing. Like, when are we going to have that conversation, internet?
Yeah, it's
That's a really good point that did not even occur
No,
to
yeah,
me.
it's really weird because, dude, I think Jeremy Irons kills it as Alfred. Like, I think he gets the tone, the personality correct, but man, is he fucking useless in this film. He says one thing, Batman does the exact opposite, just like you said, Mitch.
It's just, and this is an original idea. I've seen people starting to chat about this on Twitter as well. I don't want to take complete credit for that, but it's an interesting wrinkle though, right? Like at one point, do we stop just taking Alfred's endearing, oh, he's just the Alfred guy at face value? I don't know. Anyway, that's not the most important thing in this movie.
You know what? One question I have for the both of you guys is, I really feel like this isn't going to happen, but do you think Snyder is going to pay off the ending of this film in any way? Because looking at the Snyder Cut trailers, it really looks like they're going with the Justice League theatrical way of bringing back Superman, and I think that would completely tarnish the end of this film. If you guys don't remember, for the audience I don't remember, after they bury Clark, his coffin kind of like shakes and everything, all the dirt on top kind of levitates, hinting that like he comes back alive or something, or someone takes him. But like in the Snyder Cut, they light him with electricity from the mother box. Yeah, sorry, I don't really like that film, but yeah, that's how they do it. So I really hope they go back and Zach really hones in on that original ending for Batman v Superman instead of just saying kind of fuck it at the last minute.
Dude, I'm right there with you. I'm so hopeful, and seeing that black suited Superman is potentially making it into the Snyder Cut gives me hope. Like that's honestly, like, okay, I'll be completely frank. I don't have high hopes for the Snyder Cut actually delivering on everything it's promising. I'm going in with low expectations, so then if it is actually that good, I'm going to be pleasantly surprised rather than the other way around. But the one thing I am really looking forward to is exactly what you've hit. I want to see the black suited Superman, and I want to see how they unpack Superman coming back, because good God, did Joss Whedon botch that?
Yo, that was such a fucking train wreck. It just boggles my mind. That's really what I do want, though, at the end of the day. I just want all these loose ends from Batman v Superman, and not even loose, bro. There's just so much stuff to talk about Batman v Superman, simply because of how big it is and how like, dude, it's so relevant right now. This
Mm-hmm.
is probably one of the most relevant films up until next week at this point. But yeah, dude, next week's film takes place right after 2016 film. And dude, I just don't like Batman v Superman. I find every time I go back to rewatch this film, it gets harder and harder to rewatch. Like I said, I find the Superman stuff just super boring and dragged out between no Superman stuff. And then, especially in the extended cut, like I said, they focus a lot more on the Clark and him reporting. I don't really get too much of why they're debating whether Superman's a good guy or a bad guy. I think if he was a bad guy by now, you guys wouldn't be having this debate, but that's me. Do you guys have like any general kind of thoughts going through your head right now before we start wrapping things up?
I think that for me, I'm with the whole thing about is Superman good or bad and how they could linger on that debate. I actually really liked that Snyder wanted to explore that. I didn't love the execution, because I think that it's reasonable to say that in the event that Kal-El came to Earth from Krypton and revealed himself, that he could show up in the middle of Times Square holding like the 6 most wanted people on FBI's list, and present them to the authorities, and make a donation to charity. And I still think that there would be Senate hearings on what to do about this
Absolutely.
superpowered alien. And I love that concept in theory, but I think that, again, it's so crowded, right? And like, when it should have been a serious scene that could have explored, Mitch, you talked about the immigrant approach that has been taken to Superman lately. This has really been unpacked really powerfully in things like Jean Luen Yang's Superman Smashes the Klan. There's been some really awesome exploration of that immigrant angle for Superman. And rather than doing any of that here, we got to watch Jesse Eisenberg give somebody a thing of pee, right? And so I think that the exploration of it, yeah, it lingers on these really weird points about somebody trying to manipulate the situation, when I think that had they let it unfold organically and let it be, here's the thing, you can have it both ways here. We could have a gritty, hard take on Superman and the Boy Scout angle if you do this right, and you have him coming in and saying, I want to stand up for these values. That's how I was raised on that's both my Kryptonian and Earth values. I want to do those things, but the cynicism that rules the day just can't handle that and wants to believe that there's an ulterior motive here. There was a really powerful angle to be explored. And instead, yeah, Ryan, they just kept going back to some weird stuff on it, right?
It's one of the things that we talk about on our podcast an awful lot, especially with certain specific directors. Sometimes Zack Snyder falls into that. Is it's all log line and poor execution, right? And even if you go back to Man of Steel, and you can go onto YouTube and catch all the interviews with David S. Goyer, Zack Snyder, Christopher Nolan, the whole gang, and the log line is so well thought out, and it makes perfect sense, right? The concept of Man of Steel was like, if we're going to make Superman feel more realistic and more humanized, then the concept of if some being like this showed up on our planet, then everyone would freak out, like absolutely freak out, no matter how good intention they would be. It's exactly as you're saying, Jake. And so if that's the log line, it makes perfect sense. And in this movie, that is where some of the poor execution is. Although, like, I don't know, I still think maybe this movie isn't necessarily as much about I spent a whole hour talking about poor execution, but maybe it's not as much about poor execution, and maybe it's about expectation. And maybe DC just set themselves up to fail by attempting to turn this into such a Herculean effort, when really what we were given was like one of the better Sylvester Stallone movies. Like, when I look at this movie through the prism of, I just want to have a really good time seeing Batman and Superman go at it with some hyper intense visualization. Like, when I'm doing that, this movie doesn't disappoint too terribly much beyond like the Lex Luthor of it all. When I start trying to unpack it through the lens of, what does this mean to the zeitgeist? What does this mean for an extended universe? What does this mean for the legacy of Zack Snyder? And what does it mean for everybody on the internet that's just screaming loud noises because somebody mentioned the name, right? Like, then all of a sudden I start to get frustrated. And so I don't know if it's possible to have fair expectations of this movie, given the leading characters who made the movie and the universe that it was being a part of. But in a particular vacuum, or if we're just looking at Man of Steel and BVS together, it becomes a little bit easier for me to enjoy this operatic ride while still kind of acknowledging the fact that it is deeply imperfect. But when we have the stakes laid on it, like we have, like the way you mentioned it perfectly, Ryan, the Snyder Cut has only made this movie more important. And that doesn't do BVS any help at all. Like, the less important this movie is, the better the movie becomes.
No, yeah, easily. And as we were discussing this, it just occurred to me that this film should have a completely different title. I posted this on Twitter. It should be called Batman versus Superman: Dawn of Coincidences, because that's exactly what happens in this film. Everything is
I
just
hate the
one
title of this
giant
movie, by the
coincidence.
way. Like,
Dude,
Batman
well,
versus
it's just
Superman
like,
is like,
come on. It's
it's
so on the nose.
it's the SEO edition of it, right? Instead of giving it a creative name, then what they did was basically say, like, well, if someone was going to do the SEO optimization, like if someone needed to do Google AdWords for this movie and try to make it searchable, then we're just going to make it that. And like, I work in marketing, so that's just kind of how I frame things. I'm just sitting here thinking, like, man, so many different options they could have had, but instead they were just like, let's do the Google optimized version for it. And so it's just Batman versus Superman. So unimaginative.
And
I legitimately think that this is my theory, really. I think that there was a 4-day fight in the writer's room about what to title it, and somebody got really pissed and went up there and took literally every title written on the board, smashed it into one, flipped everyone off, and walked out of the room. And I think that's how it all happened.
Jake,
yeah, and
as someone who has sat in collaboration rooms with design teams and marketing professionals for a living, you're not far off, man. You're not far off. Sometimes projects just reach a certain point, man, and then you just go to the marker board and you circle one and you walk the hell out of there.
oh man. Dude, Batman versus Superman is quite literally a mess. Whether you want to think about it good or bad, it's a mess of a movie.
It's either a
There's a lot
glorious
of
mess
things,
or a hot mess.
dude. Yeah, pretty much glorious or a hot mess, or you just downright love this film because you just want to go against Twitter or go against the odds and say that this is the best film ever made, because I've been seeing that recently, and I
Somebody
think
said
people need
that?
to go back and dude, I've been with Snyder Cut coming a few days away, dude. I see them more and more every single day that Batman v Superman is literal cinema, and how Civil War ripped off Batman versus Superman, dude. Those arguments have becoming really tired right now, and I
But you know
can't
what?
wait.
I'm willing to bet all of those types of takes have a few things in common. Like, Christopher Nolan's probably their favorite filmmaker, right? Like, it's like
Of
anything before
course.
2009 is not going to be considered canon, right?
Yeah, pretty much.
Well, and I think that also, as the Snyder Cut looms over us, there are people who, like, Twitter is normally a place with no stakes at
Quite
all. And I
literally.
think that's what appeals to so many people, that you can put whatever madness out there you want. And, I mean, crap, there's a decent chance you're going to get elected to public office. And so like these guys are putting, so all these people for years are like, oh, Snyder Cut. We need a Snyder Cut. It would fix all the world's problems. The Snyder Cut would bring my father back to life and cure my diabetes. And everybody is freaking out for the Snyder Cut. And now that it's actually happening, all these people have to double down on it because, and it's not like the Snyder Cut brings real consequences to Twitter, but suddenly these guys who are used to nothing happening are seeing something happen. And even when it's as low stakes as an HBO film, they have to double down because so many people have invested so much of their brand online in this, even if that brand only reaches 6 people. And so you're seeing these insane takes as people double down where they're like, Zack Snyder could have remade Godfather 3 better than Coppola did. And they're just out of their minds.
Take. And I tweeted this out on our podcast, Twitter, a week or so ago. I think that the release, the Snyder Cut, represents both the best and the worst of what the internet can be. Like if the real reason why Snyder had to leave the original Justice League project is just absolutely tragic. And I don't wish that upon a single human soul. And seeing a celebration of an art form and rallying to support a filmmaker in a time of tragedy was a beautiful and hopeful thing. And that's the best part of what the internet can be, right? Saying like, we want to appreciate the Snyder Cut because he deserves to see his art come to fruition if he wants to because of what happened. And like, that's so wonderful and so great. But then as we've talked about, the underbelly of the toxicity too is so prevalent in this particular conversation as well. And so what we have is this film and this movement that sits in the middle of that Venn diagram. What is the best that Twitter and the internet can be? And what is the worst that Twitter and the internet can be? And smack dab in the middle is the Justice League movie, whether it asked for it or not.
No, yeah, definitely, Mitch. And honestly, when it comes to me, as time has gone on, even up until now, I think I've just become less interested in the film itself and more interested to see how everyone's just going to react to it at this point. I mean, it's a 4-hour, I'm going to say epic at this point because, dude, it
Behemoth
really
is the word I've been using.
Yeah, like it's a 4-hour epic. This is a massive film on so many different fronts. Regardless of being excited or not, everyone's going to watch this. And dude, I'm really excited to see what everyone says. I'm curious to see what that divide is, if there's a divide. I want to see who's going to go back and say, oh man, I really should have been saying, man, this movie is fucking great. Or wow, I really thought this movie was going to suck. Dude, no, everyone's starting to get screeners now, and it's just making me anxious. It really is.
It's going to be, I don't know. I hope I'm wrong, but I really don't think we are about to venture upon Twitter's best days. I think it's gonna get ugly. I don't know. I just look, and also the concept of the fact of how we're going to be consuming it. Like we talked about this on our podcast with Wonder Woman 84. The conversation around Wonder Woman 84 became so toxic, so fast. And I think it has more to do with the fact that everybody watched it in the safety of their own homes all at the same time. And it became a race to like say gotcha online first, rather than actually having a rollout. You go and see the movie when you can. There's a little bit more excitement about it. People are sharing pictures of kids staring at the movie poster and everything. And maybe there would have been a little bit more nuance around the criticism rather than just so much cold-hearted toxicity. Because I'm not standing for Wonder Woman 1984. That movie is problematic, but holy crap, it wasn't as problematic as how heated the conversation got. I look at how fast that rose up. I have a hard time believing we're not going to see something worse for that with something like the Justice League. But I hope I'm wrong. I hope cooler heads will prevail and we can just look at it objectively as best we can and just say, here's what worked, here's what didn't. Let's celebrate criticism as an art form. But that's not what Twitter's for. So I don't think we're going to get that.
No, yeah, honestly, I just feel like whether the movie's fucking great or either awful, there's just going to be some form of outcry. But dude, BVS was such a big movie, a massive topic to talk about, and we did a really good job of getting at all the big talking points. But before we wrap this up, I want to give you guys 2 things to say. Would you recommend this film, and what would you grade it?
Ooh, speaking of consequences,
There are stakes.
I will
I believe in you.
I will jump in.
You've got this.
You know what? I'm going to recommend this film to anyone who's never seen it because I do think that there is enough fun to be had. And I also think that we're far enough out from the hype that surrounded it that somebody who's never seen it might be able to come in without the baggage and enjoy it a lot. As far as for what I'm going to grade it, I would give it a C average. If we're going on the traditional A to F scale, I'd give it the C. I think I'll put it right there in the middle. That's not. I don't think it's one of the best things I've ever seen, but I also think that we can put. There's things that deserve our hate a lot more. Spider-Man 3 is still out there, guys.
I'm so glad you said that. We wouldn't be on brand if we didn't get a chance to throw a jab at Spider-Man 3.
And we mentioned Sam Raimi earlier. It is a testament to my love for Sam Raimi that if anybody else had made Spider-Man 3, I don't think I'd ever forgiven them. But Sam Raimi instead, I'm like, yeah, man, come make a Doctor Strange movie. Let's do this.
Fuck yeah.
You contain multitudes, Jake. That's what we've learned.
And what about you, Mitch?
That's a good way of saying it.
Oh man, it's tough. As I said before, like I waffle back and forth so much, as anybody listening to this episode can attest. Like I like this movie, but this movie has flaws, and we also have a hard time approaching this movie too. And Justice League hasn't made that any easier. So like I'm going to recommend this movie for a lot of the same reasons that Jake has mentioned, just because like if we're looking at this movie in a vacuum and take it for what Zack Snyder really is as a filmmaker, I think this movie is entertaining and it's worth a watch or two. And it's got that operatic not high quality action type movie escapism thing going for it. And there's a place for that. I think that's just not necessarily the brush we want to paint with that movie. And I think that's really what we hit. So I'm going to say C+, slightly above average, but certainly not going to be making honor roll. I think that's fair for somebody who tries to apologize for this movie and also recognize that there are some gaping flaws in it as well.
No, yeah, honestly, I couldn't agree with you more, guys. I shockingly will give this movie a recommend for people that watch these big cinematic universes and want to see these different takes on characters, just because we've never seen these type of versions of the Man of Steel, Superman, and Batman.
Mm-hmm.
And for what it's worth, movie aside, I still think they're both interesting takes that people should see. So that's why I'm going to give it a recommend. But I think I'm going to go with Jake here. See, I'm going to give it a C, but I usually give numbers, so it's around a 6.5, which does equal around a C, I'd say. So yeah, I'm about a C range. I didn't think I'd give it that high or high of a grade when you really look at it, because all I really do is, I don't want to say it, but I bash this film ultimately at the end of the day.
It's easy to dunk on.
Yeah, honestly, it really is easy to junk on, and it's a really easy movie to go back and forth with someone with. Believe me, we've all done it on Twitter before. But before we wrap it up, where can we find you awesome guys?
Oh, that's a great...
Our podcast is called Serial. Thank you for bringing it up. And
we're really excited to launch the new season. Yeah. So my name is Mitch. Jake is the other co-host. We're just a couple of geek dads who love comic books and comic book movies. We are the Watching Comics podcast. You can find us at watchingcomics.com or on your favorite podcast platform, of course. And you can hit us up on Twitter at WatchComicsPod. That's comics with an X, at WatchComicsPod. Yeah, it's the 21st century, and watching comic books is literally a thing. It's an exciting time to be alive. We are also proudly a member of the Geek Dad Podcast Network. So if you follow the Geek Dad the Geek Dad website, you can find our episodes on there as well. But yeah, Watching Comics podcast, hit us up. We'd love to have you along for the ride.
No, yeah. And I just want to thank you guys so much for coming on for this episode. Man, this was just a big episode. I didn't know who to pick to tackle with. You guys X'd and you received the job. And I couldn't have asked better people to talk with this movie with. You guys were such wonderful co-host with me on this one. And thank you so much for coming on. And thank you guys for listening to the show today. And stick around for next week. I don't really know if I will get the Justice League one out in time, but without a doubt, it will come out the week after. Man, it's weird to say the Snyder Cut is coming out next week, but nonetheless, thank you guys for watching and listening. Don't forget to leave a like, comment, and subscribe, and I will see you guys next week. Peace.